Hello again, everyone. It's Peter Mortimer again, and for this session, we're going to look at photographs of Glasgow then and now. And I'm sure you've seen some of these in the past where you've got an old image, and beside it, you've got a modern image taken from approximately the same spot for both photographers. So let's have a wee look and see what we've got in regards to Glasgow then and now. Starting off with one with quite a wow factor, and this is the Townhead Interchange. And on the top, you can see a photograph from the early 1950s. You can see on the left-hand side of that photograph the Forth and Clyde Canal flowing into the city from the east, and you've got the whole built-up area of the district of Townhead with the hospital, factories, tenements, a very, very, very busy scene, a vibrant community getting on with its life. Fast forward to the slightly more modern day, and very sadly, Townhead has virtually disappeared. It is really now a junction on the M8 motorway with a wee bit of industrial estates scattered around. And it just shows you the massive change that's happened in Glasgow since the middle of the last century through to the modern day. The modern photograph, you can see where the motorway kind of mirrors the route of the canal. And on the right hand side of the coloured photograph, you can see the new modern Royal Infirmary and the maternity unit there. This is us over into the west of the city, over to Kelvingrove, and you can see a photograph taken from virtually this identical spot, one back in the early turn of the last century and one in more modern times. And the one on top, the black and white, you can see a gondola on wires going across, and this would have been during one of the exhibitions that were often held in Kelvingrove Park. And today, in the foreground, the trees have grown to virtually mask anything behind there, but Kelvingrove remains a very popular place for people to go and enjoy the wide open spaces. Staying in the West End, we're looking west on Dumbarton Road towards Parkhead Cross. And quite amazingly, this has changed not a lot in terms of the built environment. We still have virtually all those buildings remaining intact, still looking great. They've all been cleaned up, as you know, during the 1970s and 80s. All the tenements got a bit of a facelift. And you can see Parkhead Cross, you can see the big dome at the top of the tenement at the foot of Byres Road. And it's a site that's only changed in terms of the traffic. There's no more trams and the clothes styles. And the trams in the modern day have been replaced by lots of cars and buses. Up into the air again to have an aerial view of the River Clyde. The black and white photo on top gives you an idea just how busy the Clyde was. Right, you can still see the Finnieston crane there, and beside it you can see the Queen's Dock, which was filled with ships, all sorts of cargoes coming into the city from all over the world. And in the bottom we can see the modern day version. The crane is still there, but there's not much else to recognise. In the foreground, we now have the area that has the Scottish Exhibition Centre and all the big halls. There's hotels, restaurants there. It's a vastly, vastly different place. But Glasgow has become a vastly different kind of city. The top one represents the old Glasgow, the industrial Glasgow, and the lower one, the colour one, represents Glasgow in the modern day, which is much more a services, industry-driven type of economy, where conferences are held and people come to visit the city on business. Here we are up into the north, up to Maryhill, and we're having a wee look down Firhill Road. And again, a few changes, but still very recognisable from top photo to bottom photo. On the black and white, we see the cops are out, policeman with the white armbands to direct traffic, and his colleague on a horse to control the crowds. And I think there's a chap on the left telling you to repent. He's got a white coat on with a board to get putting out a message. And of course, we've got Firhill Stadium, the home of Partick Thistle, or the Maryhill Magyars, as they were once known. But the actual view hasn't changed terrifically since the first photograph was taken. Over to Great Western Road, and here we see the underground station at Kelvinbridge, right at the Kelvinbridge itself. And the upper photo shows the underground with a canopy, which none of us in the modern day, I think, remember. This photograph would have been taken in the early 1920s, I think. And still a busy photograph. A guy standing on top of a pair of steps making some repairs to something on the canopy. And then by the modern day, the canopy disappears and you've just got the wide pavement there, but still the underground system is in operation. The Glasgow Underground system is the third oldest in the world, the oldest being New York and second being Budapest. And Glasgow delayed the opening of its underground to the December of the year, and Budapest sneaked in front and got the second place. So we're now the third oldest underground in the world, and we're probably the simplest because it's just one circular route. And if you look at the underground maps of places like New York or London, they're very complicated affairs. No fears in Glasgow about getting lost on the underground because you will eventually come back to where you got on. Just on the edge of the city now, up to the Rob Royston area, you can see some ancient worthies sitting in the black and white photo on the left there at the Wallacewell. The well where reputedly William Wallace was captured and eventually taken south to London. And there we see it in the modern day, just tucked behind a little wall, but still an attraction nonetheless. Although I believe you've got to be quite careful because the pavements around there are not very good if you plan to go and pay a visit. Industrial Glasgow now, and we go to the East End, and this is the junction of Duke Street and Shettleston Road. And on the top, we are looking at part of the Beardmore Parkhead Forge, huge foundry. The forge was founded in 1837 by the Rioch brothers and was acquired by the William Beardmore in 1861. He was succeeded by his son, also William Beardmore, and he went on to build the business to become a conglomerate. It was a massive company. At one time during First World War, it had a workforce of 40,000 people. It paid £125,000 out every week in wages, and it was a significant concern. There was about 5,000 or 6,000 worked at Parkhead Forge. The others worked at Dalmuir, making ships. They worked at in Shannon, making aircraft. And there was also factories in Lanarkshire out at Moss End doing steelwork. There was factories in Dumfries. They were truly an amazing organisation. By the early 1980s, it was uneconomic and Parkhead Forge was demolished and it was replaced by a shopping centre. And we're looking on the lower photograph now, the coloured one, taken from the same spot. Beardmore's has gone and it's been replaced by the Forge Market. Here we see Anderston Cross down just on Argyle Street, and it almost looks like it cannot possibly be the same place. The lower photo, if we start on that one this time, looks like something almost quite sci-fi. The modern roadway, flyovers, no pedestrians, no houses in sight, just people moving around in cars. And then we look at the original Anderston Cross, some beautiful tenements. The circular building was the Anderston Cross underground. You see Argyle Street spurring off to the right with tenements. And it's quite amazing how in the space of 100 years, a landscape could totally and utterly change. Back up to the Maryhill area, and this is the lower part of Maryhill Road. And we look at the two photographs. You see the black and white, the trams coming down Maryhill Road running north to south. And just between the two trams, you can see the central halls there are still in existence. If you look at the colour photograph below, you can see that. But all the tenements that we see nearest to us where the bus and the cars are passing, that's all been replaced by a modern car showroom. And that very much typifies the changes, not just in Maryhill, but in many, many other parts of the city. This is us on Byres Road looking north. And this is a wee bit like Dumbarton Road just round the corner from here, insofar as it hasn't changed much at all. The buildings are still as they were. And again, what's changed is the tram cars are no longer with us, but we have more motor cars and pedestrians wearing different clothing. You'll notice that all the ground floor tenements are occupied by shops in Byres Road. This is because the tenement owners could get better rental from shops, and particularly in busy thoroughfares like Byres Road, Dumbarton Road, and elsewhere in the city. They could get better rental from shops than they could just putting more houses in. Here's Dumbarton Road again. This is us looking west to east, just close to Partick Station. And again, you can see there's not a lot of change there other than vehicular traffic and the clothes that people are wearing. Many of the shops will have changed. There's not many original shops, sadly, left on Dumbarton Road at this spot, but at least the shops are still there and in use. Up to Maryhill again, and this is the Forth and Clyde Canal that we saw in the early slide coming into Glasgow. And this has still some recognition there. The type of the bridge at the top was called a bascule bridge, the one in the black and white photograph. That's been replaced by a modern concrete and steel bridge, but you can still see the line of the canal running pretty much the way it was, and you can see in the colour photograph just the tenement peeking over the top of the trees there, so that there are some similarities remaining up at the canal. Into the city centre now, and this is Bath Street, and this is the Elgin Place Church. And if we look at the black and white photo first off, it's a very elegant building, beautiful columns to the front, Grecian qualities about it, and it served as one of the city centre churches for a good number of years. Then, like many churches, it changed purpose because the congregations had fallen away. People were not living in the city centre anymore. They had moved to the suburbs. And in this particular instance, this church became Cardinal Folly's nightclub. So it became an entertainment venue. And it was burnt to the ground about 20 years ago. And it's now the site of a modern office block. Over to Kelvinbridge, and looking across the Kelvinbridge goods station. At the bottom, the black and white photograph gives you some idea of just what a busy place it was. There was rail lines coming in everywhere. There was little depots set out in there. There was coal production was dropped off there. The coal lorries would go in and get loaded up and take it round the houses. And then we contrast that to the modern day, and it's quite serene and peaceful. It's become a green area and a car park. And that just reflects the changes of how we move materials about nowadays. A lot of rail goods work has gone through the articulated lorry and the motorways of the world, so we're not moving as much goods around by rail any longer. Over to the south side, south of the river now, and here we are at Eglinton Toll. And Eglinton Toll, as you can see, hasn't changed all that much. There are a few changes. The quite distinct tenement where Eglinton Street meets Pollockshaw's Road, coming from Gorbals. The tenement shape still very much there. The canopy has gone. There was a canopy for travellers to pick up trams. It was like an enlarged bus shelter, and that has definitely gone. The right-hand side of the black and white photograph, we can see what was a power station. This was the St Andrews power station, and it was producing electricity to power Glasgow's tram system, together with the Pinkston power station in the north. It ceased to be a power station. The chimneys were demolished, and it was then used as the Glasgow Corporation print works. And you can see the building is still standing in the colour photograph below. Over to Shettleston now, and this is the black and white photo is taken at Budhill Square, which is very close to Shettleston railway station. And there's shops, there's tenements, and not a lot has changed in this photograph. In the foreground to the left, there's some modern shops in the colour photograph. But if we look at it, contrast that to the black and white, the shops are not there. It was just an open space. But it's a nice thing to look at because it hasn't really changed all that much. Down into the Carlton, Gallowgate, Glasgow Cross area. And this is us looking round Spoutmouth, which is a street that runs from Bell Street round into Gallowgate. And you can see in the black and white photograph how busy the photograph is. On the left, you've got a curved tenement running round onto Gallowgate. You've got that wedge of a tenement in the centre, which occupied 3 sides of a block. And on the right-hand side, you can see the railway arches, and they really are the only thing that remain in this photograph from the black and white. The railway arches at the far end are the Capone's wallpaper shop, and some of the other arches are occupied by other small businesses. But it hasn't stopped being a commercial area, these railway arches. They're still popular, but nothing much more remains of that. Over to Glasgow Cross, and a photograph taken virtually from the same spot, the black and white and the colour. And the main building, the main feature is the Market building. That dates from 1928, and it was one of the last big buildings of its type to be built in the city. You can see the Market Cross with the unicorn statue on it, the low-rise building in front of it. That dates from 1930. That has a distinction of being designed by Scotland's first female architect, a lady called Edith Burnett Hughes. And the building at Watson Street on Gallowgate with the dome top is still in situ. In the black and white photograph on the left-hand side, we're actually seeing what was Glasgow Cross railway station, and that was sadly demolished following the beaching cuts in the mid-1960s and is now totally gone. Over to Govan, and we're looking here at the curved frontage at Langlands Road, just round from Govan Cross. And in the original photo, you can see it was a Fairfield drapery with windows chock-a-block with goods, very busy kind of shop by the looks of it. And fast forward to the modern day, and it's now become a florist, certainly in this image, called Stocks and Stems. But basically, the photo hasn't changed at all. Up to the northwest, and this is us at St George's Cross. The black and white photo, very, very busy picture. Cars, people, shops, all happening. Contrast that with the colour photo below. The building at the St George's Cross is still there, with giving access out to Great Western Road and then up towards Maryhill. But it's a much quieter and almost serene picture because most of the traffic is now thundering along on the M8 motorway and has completely disappeared to the most part of St George's Cross. Back to the East End, and again back to a kind of industrial look. This is the junction of Duke Street and Millerson Street with Cumbernauld Road. And the black and white photo, the building on the left, is the ticket hall of Duke Street Station. And if you look below to the colour photograph, it's gone. There's no longer a ticket station at Duke Street. It's merely machines. And that's something that's reflected at railway stations throughout the city, throughout the country, in fact, where manned ticket booths have largely disappeared, other than fairly main stations. And in the background now, in the colour photograph, you can see the flour silos. And that's of what was Beattie's Bakery and is now Hovis. The tenement there that you see is still there. So that's a photograph, or that's a then and now that's shown a bit of everything. Some stuff has remained, some stuff has definitely disappeared. Back up to Maryhill, and here is the Gascube Road, Maryhill Road junction, which is known as Queen's Cross. And the upper photograph, the black and white, again, is quite a busy, a lot happening there in terms of buildings. The old tenements, the 3 stories, and that's been replaced by modern style housing, which is not as high, generally two floors up, but very much you can still recognise it as the layout of Queen's Cross. Over to the East End again, and the upper photograph is of a dwelling that dated from around the 1820s, 1830s on Tollcross Road. The house was then completely refurbished, and in point of fact then became a pub called the Tavern Bar. And you can see the changes. It's had a sort of mock Tudor type frontage added, but still quite effective, but certainly quite a contrast in terms of architectural style. Over to the south side and then back to the Gorbals, and this is the junction of Cathcart Road and Crown Street, and you can see the black and white photograph with a quite elegant church and the adjacent building to the left, which was a nurse's home. And all of that, as you know, with most of Gorbals, was completely flattened, and it's been replaced by more modern buildings. And you can see some modern housing there. But it remains a very busy thoroughfare, Kirkcart Road. That's just at Gushett Falls, and still very busy place. Down into the old town now, and here we are on one of the old streets, one of the old medieval streets of Glasgow, the Bridgegate, as it's properly known, but Glaswegians tend to call it Briggate. You can see the slight curve of Briggate going on to meet Salt Market at the far end, and a very busy place. Initially, it was a place where the well-heeled lived, people who were important in Glasgow. Lots of them stayed in Briggate, but as the area got more and more congested, they moved out, and the Briggate became quite a notorious area, particularly for the market that was there, Paddy's Market, which was just off Briggate and ran round onto Clyde Street. And that was a sad loss to the city in many ways, because it was such a cultural icon and disappeared in 2009. Looking at the modern day photograph, the coloured one, it's just really become a route funneling traffic from the riverside on Clyde Street out towards the East End by way of Green Dyke Street and Steele Street. Down onto the Clyde side again, and the upper photograph shows Cheapside Street. And Cheapside Street is sadly best remembered as the place of the terrible fire where 19 firemen and salvage workers lost their lives back in the early 60s. And that area, that whole area, Cheapside Street, Washington Street, Brown Street, these were all very, very densely populated by industrial type buildings, factories, warehouses, bonded warehouses. And in the modern day now, a lot of that has disappeared because it's dominated by, you can see just the edge of the Kingston Bridge on the right hand side, and it's unrecognisable in many ways. Here's a view looking from north bank of the river across to the south bank, and the black and white photo at the top is people waiting on a ferry. There were ferries to take foot passengers across the Clyde at various points, and this is some people just waiting to get the ferry across. And the recognisable building on the south bank, of course, is still standing, and that was the former headquarters of the Cooperative Society. And it was quite interesting because when the city chambers were built, the local architects or architects from all over were invited to submit plans for the design that would ultimately become the city chambers of Glasgow, and that was won by William Young. But the design that came second ended up getting picked up by the Cooperative, so they built their headquarters based on the second design. So that building could easily have been the design that would have stood now in the modern George Square. Down onto London Road, just along from Glasgow Cross, right at the corner of Moyer Street, we see the black and white photograph of a beautiful tenement, multi-floored, shops in the pavement level, almost Parisian in its design, beautiful architecture, and sadly all of that has disappeared, as has the tenements running further east from it. And it was replaced by a modern building which I think tries to copy the image of the tall tower at the corner, but doesn't quite take it off very well. It's a modern building, and in the recent times it actually now looks quite shabby, which is pretty sad. Not just buildings get photographs taken of them in Glasgow that we can compare. The photo on the left is of a bunch of lads in the Gorbals, and this photo was taken by a man called Oscar Marzaroli, who wandered around Glasgow in the early 60s taking photographs. He actually was a documentary maker, but his own passion was photography, and he took lots of photographs. And they came to prominence in the early 90s when he published a book called Shades of Grey, which was his photographs of Glasgow. And he took this left-hand photo of a bunch of young lads in the Gorbals. And lo and behold, through social media and the press, they managed to trace the three lads in the modern day, and you can see them trying to mimic the photograph, which they're doing. The guy at the front's trying to hold his hands the way he was holding them as a lad. The guy in the middle, I think, has changed not a lot. And the bloke right at the back with a little goatee beard, you can see him. He still bears a strong resemblance to his younger self. And it's just a lovely then and now photograph. And finally, then and now, not to do with Glasgow, but just a reflection on the modern day. On the left-hand side, we've got a photograph of Neil Armstrong, who was the first man to walk on the moon. And when he was on the moon, and he was there for about 2 days, he took 5 photographs. And it's spoofed on the right by a young lady who went to the toilet and took 37 photographs, which maybe an exaggeration, but not far off. And that seems to be the way of the world, that everything gets photographed. People send photographs of the dinner they're eating in a restaurant. I don't know how interested people are in that, but that's the world we live in. And I hope you've enjoyed this then and now of Glasgow. And thank you very much indeed. Thank you.